So we went all through this, right? I don't remember. It was a long time ago. Anyway, highly stereotyped fixed action pattern, highly flexible, innate learning. Okay, so as we remember from birds, remember birds? Birds. This is a bird brain. See that? I don't know if you can comprehend that because it turns out that our brain size has been getting smaller in the last 20,000 years. We're not as smart as as the cavemen were, it turns out. Anyway, it's about neurons and the proximate mechanisms of behavior in terms of neurons. So here we have fixed action pattern. I know I went over this. And then in terms of the stimulus, obviously this guy gets the best. This is pretty good, but they really respond actually to the bigger the red, the more release they get. And then it goes to circuits in the brain, and lo and behold, the chick pecks. And then that is in turn a releasing mechanism for the adult to regurgitate food. And all this is, yeah, I know we've done this. Okay, so unlike human males, these guys will mate with anything, even an inanimate object. Of course, I forgot about Barbie. She's inanimate, but for some people, she's real. If you put Siri's voice over Barbie, then you've got, something pretty good. Okay, I talked a little bit about this. This guy is deceiving. These are blister beetle larvae. Deceiving this, releasing a pheromone. They come in, they all climb on board. He goes and mates with a female. They climb on her. They go back to the nest and eat up all the eggs. An evolutionary arms race between bats and moths. We've been following this kind of bats and moths interaction for a while. There's a lot of time dedicated in the book to it. But they've been finding some stuff recently. So an evolutionary arms race is like the Red Queen hypothesis. It's antagonistic coevolution. In this case, the bats are trying to catch the moths. They've got a pretty good method of doing it. They're using kind of echolocation. Of course, from the moth side, they want to avoid it. And so the moths have a number of ways to avoid bats. And in turn, in some bats, the bats have then run a counter defense against the moths. So for the bats, we have echolocation of moths. The moths can detect, they've got ears on their wings or underneath on their thorax, and they can detect bats echolocation from like 30 meters away or more. And if a bat is echolocating from there, they tend to just try to serendipitously fly off to get out of the way. But the louder and nearer bat echolocation triggers this FAP evasive maneuver, and we'll see how it actually works. And then finally, moths are able to jam bat sonar by emitting an ultrasound of their own. Now, the bats are not only in this interaction with moths, but they also have an interaction with each other. They're in competition for food. So, in terms of bats are actually also jamming the ultrasound of other bats competing for moths. So they jam the bats kind of like what the moths did, and then they swoop in for the meal. At the same time, the moths, of course, are they're sending out ultrasound signals too to deter the bats from actually locking in on where they are. And then finally, because these moths are able to do various things, they found some bats that kind of they still use echolocation, but it's a stealth. It's a very quiet, low-intensity ultrasound. The moths really can't detect until the bat is about 3 meters away. And then, of course, they lock in and they go in for the kill. So, this is exactly what the Red Queen predicts. As one side gets better at what it does, the bats in terms of capturing moths, the other side has to keep up just to stay in the same place. The moths have all these mechanisms that they then evolve to deal with the bats and to avoid getting eaten. And then in return, the bats are finding new ways so they won't be detected, and the moths can't actually deter them. Okay. So this is the bats and moths in action. Very nice technique. Oops, got away. Okay, so on to the next slide. Well, I'll give you a kind of a run through about what's going on here. The bats emit this ultrasonic call. They get echoes back. They locate prey. That also, the moths can hear that. So they've got this very simple circuit that triggers an escape behavior, which we'll see kind of in a second. So the moths detect the bat call, then they take evasive action. If the source is distant, they kind of fly away. It's much more dramatic. It actually happens where the echolocation from the bats actually triggers an automatic response in the nervous system. Here we've got our noctuid moth. Got a brain up here, thoracic ganglia, and then these ears, 2 on either side. And then we've got this tympanic membrane. It's a mechanoreceptor, so you get echolocation. It makes it vibrate. It's then picked up by the A1 and A2 receptor cells, and then that signal is sent to these interneurons. We'll get into it. There's a nice little chart that's coming up. So Neurons and their operation. Let me get this. So there's a dendrite, and the electrical charge is initiated from there, is passed on from another neuron, goes down all the way down to the next axon. So this is the direction of the action potential. The action potential does change in electrical charge, and it allows communication between and signals between the two sort of neurons right in here. So if the signal isn't strong enough, the dendrites pick it up from the previous cell, then it doesn't create a strong enough action potential, which addresses the permeability of the cell membranes, and it's the way the ions actually move through the membranes. But if it's strong enough, it's sent all the way down, and then it, of course, there's neurotransmitters that go through the gap between these two cells here, and that triggers the action potential if it's strong enough in the following cell. And so there's this kind of volley of cells, neurons, cells, action potentials onto the next cell. Neural network of the moth. And as you can see, we've got these ears on either side of the body. Those are the tympanum membranes. And then there's these sensory neurons. There's A1 and A2. The signal is then passed on to these interneurons. So the interneurons are part of the thoracic ganglia, and that signal is then transferred to the brain. At the same time, the signal then is transferred across back from the brain down to the thoracic ganglia, other interneurons, to the motor neurons, which then affect muscle wings. And in terms of evading, so this only happens when the bat is very close. So in terms of evading, when there's really strong signal from the A1 receptors, that triggers a response where it kind of, I guess it stops the signal, or it changes the signal from the brain, and the muscle neurons don't work in synchrony anymore. And that causes the moth to kind of go off in any random direction or fall down or whatever, where the moth doesn't even know where it's going, but neither does the bat. Okay, properties of the ultrasound detecting auditory receptors of the moth. So here are these different receptors, the A1 receptor, the A2 receptor. When there's low intensity stimulus, the A2 receptor doesn't respond at all to the sound, and the A1 receptor doesn't respond much too. However, when there's moderate intensity stimulus, the A1 receptor fires, and the A2 receptor doesn't. And then finally, with high intensity stimulus, we've got a situation where both actually fire due to these ultrasound pulses. So you have these ultrasound pulses right here, all the way down the line. The A1 receptors are obviously firing. In contrast to pulses, which the A1 receptors obviously respond very strongly to. If there's a kind of a constant sound, they initially respond to it, and then the receptors kind of stop responding to it. So it's the pulses that are part of the stimuli that the A1 receptors are very sensitive to do. There's no pulses, which correspond to the echolocation pulses of the bats, then it's kind of like the receptors, in a sense, ignore it. Moths have different responses depending on where the bat actually is. The A1 receptors are pretty sensitive, even at low intensity, but certainly at moderate intensity. The moths can detect bats from 30 meters away, maybe further. The intensity of the echolocation is kind of proportional to how far away the bats are. So far away, the intensity is much lower. The A1s don't fire very significantly, but they certainly respond. And then as the bat starts to get closer, they can tell where the bat is actually coming from because, of course, they've got ears on either side of their thorax, and depending on which one is facing the bat or not, they can determine where the actual bat is coming from. The moths can also detect whether the bat is above them or below them. Of course, the wings kind of get in the way of or block the echolocation, so when that happens, they can kind of tell, especially since the wings are going up and down, there's kind of a modulation, and the moths can tell whether a bat is then up. If the bat is underneath, there's intensity all the way, and they can tell then it's underneath. Therefore, the moths can take evasive action. Let's say from 30 meters away, they determine where the bat is, and then they can respond in turn by flying away from that bat. But as a bat actually hones in on a moth, and of course then it's sending these echolocation pulses, and they get more rapid, the pulses, and stronger, the A1 receptors really start to fire, as we saw earlier. And at a certain point, the A2 cells also start to fire. At this point, the bat is perhaps less than a second away from eating the moth, and this requires extremely fast evasive action. So when the A2 receptors fire and the A1 receptors are firing, the message goes to the brain, and it seems to shut down the central steering mechanism, which causes the moth's wings to beat out of synchrony or irregularly, and it causes very erratic or unpredictable flight by the moth and the bat. The moth, of course, doesn't know where it's going, but neither does the bat. And of course, so these signals go back to the interneurons, then to the motor neurons, and then that are attached to the cells of the muscle cells that cause various flapping of the wings. In the following video, we'll see how this actually works.
This yellow underwing moth is very unlikely to end up as their prey. It's equipped with an early warning system to detect a bat attack. Bats hunt with sound. It gives them a better picture of their surroundings than their eyes can see in the darkness. They produce very high-pitched squeals beyond the range of human hearing, and then listen for echoes bouncing back off potential prey. Each echo gives the bat a single audio image, like a snapshot of objects close by. Repeated squeals give the bat a more continuous impression. Once the prey is in range, the bat locks onto the target and homes in for the kill. But this moth can hear what's coming. Its ears are specifically tuned to the bat's sound search system. The moth's ears are simple pits just above its legs, hidden under its fur. The bat's shrieks vibrate the moth's eardrums, triggering a reflex action of nerve impulses, which fire straight into the wing muscles. As the bat closes in, it squeals higher and faster, and the moth's wings react, changing its flight path to duck out of danger. So the moth's life is saved by a dramatic nosedive, switched on entirely by sound.
Moths also have another counter-defense or defense against bats. They can actually jam a bat's echolocation ability, and so it explains this in the following video. So we've seen what moths can do to bats, including taking evasive action or jamming their echolocation. But bats also have to contend with other bats. They're all hunting for insects for food, and there's a lot of competition. So when you see all these bats come streaming out of a cave, there's a lot going on. Well, it turns out bats can also jam bats, so here's a video on that as well. Now that we've found out what bats and moths can do, it turns out that humans also have echolocation abilities. It's certainly not as refined as either the bat or the moth, but this following video will show you this fellow who's blind, who can actually use echolocation using clicks that he makes to navigate the world around him. And he's taught this to many different people. As you know, many animals are able to detect things that humans can. For example, ultraviolet light, electrical signals, heat, like pit vipers, things like that. So here we have a good example. A lot of flowers signal insects or insect pollinators that they are good to eat and kind of guides into where the nectar is. Another interesting ultraviolet detection system is with kestrels and voles. Now kestrels, which we have right here, are very small falcons, and they can eat all sorts of different things, including birds, but also these little voles. Okay, and voles live in these fields. The question is, for the kestrel, how does it know which fields have lots of voles and which fields don't? Well, it turns out that when kestrels fly over these fields, and there's lots of voles, there are vole runways all over the place, and on those runways, which are just not below the surface, but on top of the surface, but underneath the grass, voles, they defecate and they urinate. And that stuff actually shows up under ultraviolet light. So kestrels can actually see ultraviolet light and see those feces and urine. And we can see that right here. This is under ultraviolet light. So when a kestrel flies over a field and there isn't much of this ultraviolet signature of feces and urine, then it keeps flying and it finds another field, and if there's a good signature, then it knows there's lots of voles there, and it's a good place to hunt. Monarchs, butterflies, also use UV radiation in terms of finding out where they're going, as well as polarized light. So if we look at this map right here, from the Rocky Mountains, there's a population throughout here that migrates to the coast and hangs out. And then there's these Midwestern and Canadian populations that migrate back down to Mexico. And this is a multi-generational migration where the ones that migrate down to Mexico overwinter, then migrate back, lay their eggs on milkweed. That generation hatches, flies up to their summering grounds, and then depending on how far up they are, they either lay another generation that then flies back down, or they themselves fly back down to Mexico. So it turns out that monarchs use radiation, UV radiation, to actually begin their journey, and then they actually switch to polarized light. And they found this out by using polarizing filters as far as the polarized light. So, for up or down filters, or no filter, they were able to see the polarized light as it is. So these are directions along the x-axis, and then number of events on the y-axis. But if they put the horizontal filter in, then they were thrown off as far as which direction they were actually going. When moths detect bats, as we saw, it's pretty much a one-step process. It's very simple. You have those A1 receptor neurons that are activated by the tympanic membranes. And then they go to interneurons and whatnot. And that's fine for what they have to do, but some pattern or some behaviors are a lot more intricate and require more intricate signaling. And one of those is what are called central pattern generators. So, as we can see, some require a series of muscular responses that are not under the command of a single cell. So the question is, what is a central pattern generator? Well, you can see neural clusters play a kind of a pre-programmed set of messages, kind of a motor tape, to organize the motor output underlying behavior. So once it's activated, that motor neuron stuff tape plays out all the way till the end until the stimulus that was causing the behavior ends. Central pattern generators are rhythmic patterns of behavior, and they're called oscillators. And they include flying, walking, breathing, things like that. When they're activated by a releaser, these controlling neurons make two cells fire in opposite phases by alternating excitation and inhibition. Tritonia are these little sea slugs or sea hares right here. And they're not necessarily very smart, but they don't have to be. But this one looks like it's in trouble because if it doesn't move, there's this sea star that is probably going to latch onto it and eat it. Well, once the Tritonia actually senses the sea star, or any other predator for that matter that's slow moving, the central pattern generator, so we can see up here we've got sensory receptors, and then we've got swim initiation neurons, so excitation and inhibitory, and then central pattern generator is right here, and finally flexor neurons that make these muscles fire. So it requires a lot of coordination and between many hierarchically arranged neurons, as we can see hierarchy right here, causing muscle contractions where it can kind of swim away, as we'll see right here. Here's the video that we're going to play on this. What is stimulus filtering? Well, organisms, including us, get bombarded with all sorts of information that's coming in. Some of it's relevant, some of it's not. Some is very important to pay attention to, others less so. And so our brain actually filters a whole bunch of information that we just don't really care about and that really isn't important to our, let's say, survival or reproduction, whatever. So stimulus filtering is the ability of neurons or neural networks to filter out vast amounts of information in order to focus on the biologically relevant ones. Stimulus filtering takes place at the level of the sensory receptors, the interneurons, the brain, all of that stuff. I put it on and left it on. Why did it do that? Okay, anyway, damn. For example, here we have this fly, Ormia ocracei, is attuned to the frequency of a male cricket's call, which is around 4 to 5 kilohertz. So the cricket is actually, the male is calling, of course, for a female, and the fly, which is a parasitoid fly, it's going to lay its eggs on the cricket, follows this signal. The male is hoping that a female will come in. Instead, we've got this fly that comes along and lays its eggs. So we can see the frequency along the x-axis here, which is about 4 to 5 kilohertz. Oops. 4 to 5 kilohertz. And then the threshold for the fly's response, which is along the left side y-axis, and the relative intensity of the cricket song on the right. And so as the male, as the cricket song is being made, the female fly, who's going to do the egg laying, not the male doesn't even matter, corresponds with the cricket song and those 4 to 5 kilohertz. So the fly is able to lock on to the important information and kind of get rid of all the other stuff. Okay, so there's this animal called a star-nosed mole. They're found in North America. You've probably never seen one because they spend most of their life underground. And they've got this appendage for detecting prey. And it's amazing. There's, I think, 27 different arms of this. And it's very, very sensitive to any kind of movement or tactile signal that they get. And so there's this one 11 here that's corresponds to this area right here. And this is actually what it looks like. Hold on a second. There we go. So, and this is number 11 here. And then if you look at appendage number 11 and then average area of cortex per input fiber. So essentially, this whole thing is mapped out. This is the actual cortex in the brain. This whole thing is mapped out right onto the cortex. So we can actually see what area is being tweaked or getting a signal and how the firing works. And it turns out it's pretty effective.
In North America, another mole has paws that look like flippers. These help it to swim under ice to collect insects, but this is not their primary purpose. This creature is a digger, a star-nosed mole. Its paws are spades for pushing aside soil while it tries to locate its prey with its astonishing nose. This has 22 fleshy arms.
Oh, 22,
Each
my
is so
mistake.
densely packed with nerve endings that the mole could touch a pinhead with its nose in 600 places at once, allowing it to locate the tiniest of prey. Living in soil rather than sand, this mole can dig proper tunnels. It constructs a labyrinth of passages and regularly patrols them to collect any prey that drops into them.
Juicy. Gollum.
The star-nose underground is largely beyond the reach of predators.
Not entirely, of course. Snakes and whatnot, but pretty much. Okay. So, this is kind of a sensory analysis for 4 different insectivores, and then us, and a few other things. So we've got the star-nosed mole. That's right here. As you can see, it's got kind of big digging paws, so there's a lot of cortical material that's dedicated to that. And then, no, actually, this is it, sorry. And then this is the appendages right here. So it's almost like the whole animal is kind of dedicated to that movement and finding prey. Obviously, it changes, it differs. So African hedgehog, I guess, which one is that? I think it's this one. In almost all of them, it seems like the mouth is a big part of it. If you look at humans up here, so our hands have a lot of receptors. If you've ever been injured your finger or whatever, it's usually much more painful than some other part of your body. And your feet, because we're always walking around. Let's see. Well, also there's, what is it? This thing right here. That's, we're always concerned about that as well. So this is actually how our brain is kind of mapped out in terms of our physical world around us. And you can see that there's certain areas that are more dedicated to certain things. So obviously language for us, if we could actually map that out, there would be an area of the brain that's really dedicated to language acquisition and then language use. Oh, shoot. Hold on a second. I don't.
Click on the X in the square.
The red one.
The red X.
This one?
Alex,
No,
What, man?
it's not working. It's okay.
Whoa!
that's right. You're
Usually there's
Alex
a.
can answer different questions about the same object.
Come on. How many corners? What shape? What shape?
More!
Corner. Four corner, good boy.
Alex hasn't just learned to say
You
a
gotta tell
certain
me.
word when he sees a particular
How many?
object. He's
How
paying.
many?
What's going on here? Come on, you can do it. Okay, so these are New Caledonian crows. They they're on this island in the South Pacific off of Australia, and they make a lot of tools to use to fish out grubs and things like that. Yeah, I don't want to lose that stick. Okay. So these are smart. And then here's a little abstract thinking. I think you saw this before, but just in case. What is intelligence? I asked the class about this. I think I said something like, kind of like pornography, you know it when you see it. But here's some ideas. The ability to retain knowledge. That seems like memory or something like that down here. Ability to create a stream of thought. Yeah, okay. Certainly ability to problem solve. Some people are, or more intelligent people perhaps can solve more difficult problems. The ability to think abstractly. So what is abstract thought? I asked Bobby Tang this, and he suggested that it was an ability to make inferences about things that perhaps you've never seen before from things that you've already seen or experienced. So for example, with Alex the parrot, Alex had been shown figures and objects like circles and rectangles and squares and whatever, and he also seen different colors, and some of those objects, let's say the green circle or a yellow square, he had seen before. But he was then given a new tray with those objects, but he was asked then to pick out all the green squares, which he had never been asked to do before. And of course he did. So he was able to think and infer from an old situation that he had already learned about. He knows what different colors things are, what different objects and figures are, and he knows how to put them together to represent reality when he's confronted with something new. According to this website, what is intelligence? The ability to learn and use different ideas to the individual's own benefit. Learning ability, in other words, how easily a brain learns new strategies. Cerebral capacity, the number of different ideas that brain can learn and use. Some people, of course, just have a one-track mind. So here's it's from this web address, and it's kind of interesting. And it says the ability to learn and use different ideas to an individual's own benefit. And that it's kind of, there's two different parts to it. Learning ability, in other words, you can learn something new, and a capacity to learn and how much you can learn, like a capacity for new ideas. Reason, plan, solve problems, kind of what Bobby was showing. Was that right? I think it was. And then there's something, there's a G factor. This is what's the basis for an IQ. A general intelligence in terms of how an individual interacts with his environment, and some individuals do it a lot better than others. And so I don't know what the exact definition is and how they've defined it in psychology, but it's just, it's generally positively correlated with specific aptitudes. So they test you on, let's say, math skills, they test you on various other things. It hasn't shown up that much, by the way. Intelligence, you think there's an intelligent life on other planets or other solar systems? Why?
Probability factor, right?
Okay.
Based on evolution and probability.
Yeah, but intelligence, so we've got, how many different kinds of organisms or lineages do we have that are multicellular? We've got, fungi, we've got plants, we've got brown algae, let's see, what is it? Some things they're single-celled, but at certain times they all come together, like slime molds. Okay. The only group that actually has shown any signs of what we would call intelligence are animals. Obviously, plants respond, and even some plants might like Mozart, supposedly. We don't know that, but it's not a really common thing. In fact, if you actually look at, they've done experiments on selecting for intelligence. And like they've done it with fruit flies, a whole bunch of different things. Usually there's lower fitness when you actually select for intelligence. So like in humans, there's obviously we know what, let's say the benefits. We can think, we can plan, all that, but what are the costs of having a big brain?
High energy use.
Yeah, I mean, like 20%, even though it's only 2% of our total body mass. Anything else? How about childbirth?
Difficult.
Yeah, difficult and sometimes deadly, right? So, we've mentioned that some, well, it looks like human brain capacity in terms of cubic centimeters is actually decreased over the last 20 or 30,000 years. Who posted something like that?
Oh, I did.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So what was that?
They said that, that the cubic volume or something has decreased,
Uh-huh.
and then I forgot what, but they were saying why some of the reasons, and then they said what you said, that maybe it's just more efficient, so it doesn't need to be as big.
Mm-hmm.
Forgot what else. But yeah, that's what they said.
I mean, like one hypothesis is that we've become domesticated.
Oh yeah, and we also have others, like we depend on other things, so we don't need to store as much information.
Yeah, but this started happening 20 or 30,000 years ago,
Oh yeah.
before the advent of writing, right? So,
I have a question though. When did tool use evolve?
oh, that happened with
Was that before?
Homo habilis, yeah.
So was that way before?
Yeah, 2.5 million years ago or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they don't think it could be related to tool use, or it could be?
Or tool use could be related to intelligence and a bigger brain volume.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, some people have said, well, what's the cause and what's an effect? I mean, I would say it's probably abstract thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then how you use it, all sorts of different ways,
Okay.
right? So, what?
Well, just kind of going back to your question, if there's intelligent life on other planets.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the probability to happen here, right? And there's a theory that before our common ancestor, before our Luca, right, there was the rise of other cells, and they just didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
So then, the rise of life happened multiple times.
Well, yeah, I mean, the life might have happened. I think the probability of life on other
Is high.
places is pretty high.
But once you have life happening, factor in the billions of other stars and other planets and whatnot, it seemed like it's a pretty high chance that.
Yeah, so it's the anthropic principle is what they call it. Yeah. The thing is, I just look at it in terms of life here, and only one lineage, animals, has shown any signs of intelligent life, and obviously certain lineages don't even show that within animals. So it's definitely rare, and I don't know if it's, well, obviously it could happen. I just don't know. First of all, would you consider a cat intelligent?
To a degree.
Okay. Yeah.
I think when we're talking about intelligence on other planets, we're talking about unless we use this word, other civilizations that are able to leave their planet as well.
Yeah. Okay. The thing is, Do you think we can communicate pretty well with cats? What do you think, what's the chances of some other civilization that we come in contact to, that we can actually communicate with them in any real way, any more than with a cat?
Well, if they're able to get off their planet.
What?
If they're able to get off their planet.
Well, yeah, I'm
There's a
sure.
higher level. Well, it's kind of like a cat is, it's all relative, right?
Mhm.
We can communicate with gorillas, for example. We have some basic communication with them. We have basic communication with like higher order intelligent beings. So we're assuming that whatever other thing is out there, if they're able to develop enough technology to be able to manipulate travel or manipulate this or that, then we should be able to communicate with them.
What if they encode thoughts in a completely different way than we do?
Right. But then if they're that advanced, they would be able to
Well, I mean,
figure things out.
Maybe that's an assumption. You're making an assumption. Maybe they would look at us like we're looking at a cat and think, God, well, they're nice to have as pets, but
well, yeah, that's the thing. I think you're assuming that they would communicate with the same mechanisms that we do. You know, we use a certain, very limited range of senses to communicate with our world to understand it, and they might be on a completely different range.
Right, no, I understand it. I'm just saying that I'm making the assumption that they're much more advanced than we are.
then they would look at us as like a cat.
They would look at us as like a cat or even like an ant, but perhaps if they have any interest, perhaps, for example, let's forget about talking about other civilizations
Sure.
and other planets. Just within on Earth, right? I'm talking about thousands of years later, we might have developed enough technology where we could communicate with a cat. That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. So if we're dealing with that type of advanced civilization somewhere else, even though we might be an ant to them, they would have already figured out how to communicate with an ant.
Deep thoughts, though. Yeah. Anyway, some ideas that are kind of.
Right, going to the whole question of intelligence, we might, in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah.
We could just be, within the entire universe, we could be just like a rock, We might be really stupid. We think we're intelligent. But
Yeah. We're just kind of what is it? Animated matter in some way.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. And then there's this general intelligence I was talking about, the one that they try to measure for IQs. But there's also different kinds of intelligence. Anybody in here play music? None? Oh, that's
Science majors.
what?
It's a room full of science majors.
Yeah, I know, but
We don't do art.
God. Okay. Anybody in here good at math? So you're, and you. So you have a kind of a facility for math that maybe other people don't. Because I don't have a facility for math. I went through calculus, but I fell apart because there's a spatial part to mathematics at higher levels, and it turns out I don't have that. In fact, I'm actually a retard when it comes to spatial stuff. No, it's true. I went into UCLA and they gave me this, kind of cognitive test. And I thought, okay, I think I did okay. But I always knew, like, with spatial stuff, like I'm a stick figure guy, right? Nothing more than that. But I get a call a week later from an MRI facility saying, we've set you up with an MRI. I said, okay, fine. And then the person on the other end said, so what did you have, a stroke? I go, no, but a lot of people with strokes, of course, don't know they've had them, so I guess it's possible. So they did an MRI and nothing shows up. But I've known this since I was forever, that I've got this diminished spatial sense. Now, I don't know what I'm missing, obviously, because I don't have it. But I definitely don't have it. It's interesting because I can actually, I have a map sense. It's not as advanced as some other people, but it's not like someone who goes outside and they've got to turn on their GPS every time they go outside because they don't know where they are. I met people like that. They're afraid to go outside. There's linguistic intelligence, social intelligence. We talked about the Machiavellian or social intelligence hypothesis. So, in fact, there's like idiot savants who can be incredibly gifted at music or figurative art or things like that, even though in all other ways they're retarded. So, what led to the evolution of intelligence? Any ideas? Before there were intelligent beings, life got along just fine without it.
Maybe it was an increasingly changing world, and we needed to be able to navigate, different scenarios.
It's just an advantage, right? I mean,
It's an expensive advantage,
it's
though.
an expensive advantage, but it's cost benefit advantage.
In some
So it's like
situations.
So you're like an octopus, and you can think more abstractly than other sea creatures.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to eat more often, even though it's more expensive. So on that aspect,
Yeah.
you'll survive.
I mean, obviously, there has to be a benefit that outweighs the cost, or selection is going to favor less intelligence. And that's been shown a lot of time. I mean, there's a question now, of course, with that study that you mentioned, maybe we're just selecting for dumber people. Of course, you're then assuming, is there a correlation between brain capacity or brain size and intelligence? Our caveman ancestors from 20 or 30,000 years ago, well, we're pretty intelligent right now. We've done some amazing stuff. They never did anything like that. Maybe they were capable of it, we just don't know. Maybe their bigger brain, well, one hypothesis, they were less efficient with it. Or two, it was used for something else that we don't really confront nowadays. So that's a couple of different hypotheses. So someone said something about moving around, and so one of the ideas about why intelligence evolved is the cognitive map hypothesis. And knowing where things are and being able to access those things. They did a study in Australia. And they looked at IQ tests in Aborigines and then Australian, Europeans. And the Europeans, of course, there's been a problem with IQ tests in terms of cultural stuff. But one thing they did notice is that the Aborigines scored much, much higher on spatial stuff and kind of having a mental map than Western Europeans. I mean, it was off the board, even though they didn't do well on the other, like the IQ test and stuff like that. They did extraordinarily well because before they, some are still living that way, as nomadic hunter-gatherers, and knowing where things were and reading where things might be was absolutely essential to their survival. So, this is, these are corvids, jays and crows and ravens and things like that. And they're very good at remembering where they put things because they cache a lot. And they cache, for future use. And not only do they cache, but they remember what they cached as well. So, if they cache something like a seed versus the larva of some insect, they knew that the larva would spoil much more quickly than the seed would. And so they knew to go back and retrieve it before. So obviously they had that kind of abstract sense that they knew, oh, this is what happens if you compared to these two sorts of foods. And nutcrackers are probably the best caching animals. In other words, they make these small surface caches and they put a few seeds in all of them. It's kind of spreading the risk. And they can do like 30,000 during a season, 30,000 different caches. Way beyond anything that we could do. They also, depending on if they live in social groups or more by themselves, there's also a difference in what they do as well. So when they're living in social groups, they're very aware of who's around when they're caching. And what they do is they make false caches. So there's another, there's Jerry over there, and I don't want him to steal my caches, so I'm going to make a whole bunch of false caches. And he's not going to know which one actually has the seeds in it. So, it's a pretty smart group of birds. Sexual selection. Einstein, yeah, he was ripped. Yakety yaks, pretty good. So, in terms of sexual selection, do you guys make a decision based on looks or on intelligence or anything like that? No, mainly looks, right?
Depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's true. So there's this idea that sexual selection favors intelligence. Obviously, an intelligent mate would provide certain advantages versus one who's dumb as a post. And then, of course, there's the, and we talked about this earlier with the whole camp paper. the social brain hypothesis, that in animals with kind of intelligent in big social groups, you have to know your way around in terms of who's out there, what their status is, perhaps reading the intentions of others, and this this could be hyenas, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. And there's this idea of, anybody know what theory of mind is?
Sounds familiar.
Let me see what the let's see. Damn you. Did it again. And do you know about, there are certain people who've suffered like a stroke or something, and they don't recognize faces anymore. Oliver Sacks, who's a neurologist, he's written all those books that were made into movies like, what was it? The one with Robin Williams. Anyway, he wrote a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Lamp. And people look at someone and they say, I know that person, but it's an imposter. There's not a connection going on there between the image they see and the feelings that they have. And so they know it's not the real person. It's actually called, I think it's called, yeah, prospagnosia. And also, some people are just born with kind of a deficit in actually recognizing faces. But you can imagine what it would be like, or maybe you can't, running around the world and not being able to recognize faces. You'd be at a total loss.
It's a specific region in the brain.
There is, that's dedicated to,
They did an experiment where they put some electrodes on this guy. I think he suffered a stroke or he suffered something.
Right.
But when they hit a switch,
mm-hmm,
what he said was, everyone's face turned into that. And when they turn off the switch,
mm-hmm,
then he saw the faces again.
right, right,
So it's just, they were able to pinpoint the specific region in the brain
mm-hmm,
that is used for facial recognition.
yeah. So obviously, I mean, if you have a dedicated area of the brain, you know for something, whether it's that or anything else, you know it's important. And not only is there all, facial recognition, but we have to recognize the emotions behind those faces. Now, some people are very good at hiding what they're thinking. And it's probably, in terms of a Machiavellian, so Machiavelli was a count. And he, in terms of foreign policy or other interactions like that, he felt, okay, you want to get to certain ends, and it really doesn't matter how you get there. It's a matter of getting there. So whether you do it by, let's say, gassing thousands of people, or you do it by getting them all to join along, it's kind of irrespective. It's an amoral viewpoint of the world. And we've all probably met people that are manipulative. That kind of operate that way. In fact, I mean, it's hard. I can't, I'm not all that great. I can make, well, I can, I guess, tell a yarn, and some people will go along. But in general, there are some people that are just amazing at what they can do, and gives them a huge advantage. So, and they also, so this is a social group of wasps, and these are solitary. And it turns out the social group, they have a much more varied face, so their faces change, or their faces have a lot more variation in them. And others in the group use that in terms of dealing with members of the group. Some are obviously more dominant, let's say, than others. But obviously you don't need that if you're off by yourself. It's unimportant. So, I guess that's all I'm going to say about facial recognition, but those are like three of the main hypotheses, but there's a lot more hypotheses for why there might be intelligence besides those three. So I think that's that for this. Oh, it is. Okay, we're done. I think that's it. So today, for those of you I'll stick around, we'll talk about your projects. Everybody else, you can go if you want. How are things, I just want to know how things are going, that's all. I talked to your group. Have you guys started yet? Is everything going okay? Mm-hmm. You didn't? Okay, good. Mm-hmm. What, okay, so when does it due? Yeah. No, we do. Yeah. We don't have class on Thursday. We don't have class anyway. Oh, the hawk does? Okay. Let me bring it up. What? Hmm? Yeah. I think so. You don't want it? We're gonna have it. Maybe I'll bring some like turkey or something like that. I don't know. But no, we're gonna have it. Of course, it'll probably be a wasted section because you just won't, people won't show up and all that, but we'll have something that will give you an advantage on the next test that people who don't show up won't have.
Free 10 points.
How's that?
A free 10 points for people that show up.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Oh, what am I doing? Okay.